I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast. The Molly Maguires was a secret society that originated in 19th century Ireland and later emerged in the coal mines of Pennsylvania. Their goal was to defend the working class. Although 20 men were hanged, the true extent of the Molly Maguires' existence and involvement in Pennsylvania remains a subject of debate. According to author Anthony Bimba, the name of a Molly Maguire being attached to a man's name is sufficient to hang him.
Before we get into the Molly Maguires, head on over to patreon.com/corruptpodcast to join a rad community that we're building over there. We have 4 tiers to support us, anywhere from free to $5 a month. Behind the scenes, early access, shout out, and water bottle stickers are waiting for you. Join the Corrupt crew, then come back here and hit play.
We will also be having a special Halloween episode coming down the pike. This will drop on Halloween Day, so when you're ready to get away from fake horror to real horror, we've got you. Paige and I will be dressed up to celebrate scarecrows, pumpkins, leaves, ghosts, and scary stories.
And a necrophiliac pastor.
That went dark.
Sure did.
If the Molly Maguires Society existed at all, they began in the wake of the other secret societies in Ireland around the 1730s. At the time, Irish farmers lived in poverty while working for English landlords. After paying the church a 10% enforced tithe and the English the rent, the Irish farmers were able to farm just enough food to support their families.
The English learned that the farmland was exempt from the tithe, and suddenly farmland became a hot commodity. The landlords began fencing off their cattle through the farmland. This created less available farmland, but the rent did not reduce for the lesser amount of land, and it didn't help the farmers feed their families either.
The resentment grew until vigilante justice began to take place from many different secret societies. Some of the originals were named the Ribbon Men or White Boys.
The White Boys and Ribbon Men were the original working-class peasants who were fighting the man.
The Ribbon Men wore a green ribbon identifying themselves. The White Boys' name came from a practice of wearing white shirts or smocks over their clothes, even as they dug up pastures or burned down houses in the middle of the night.
The movement opposed landlords by tearing down fences and filling in ditches to create access to the farmland. They broke the legs of cattle and attempted to intimidate the landlords.
Those cows were innocent. Respect the cows.
Yeah, it's a death sentence to the cows, but on the farmer side, it was also a death sentence to them and their families if they had no farmland for food.
I know, but those poor cows.
Yeah, it's rough. They were fighting dirty.
I love cows.
At night, it was safest to keep the windows of your home lit to show support of the White Boys. Those without lights were targeted as sympathizers of the English. Those houses were robbed or worse.
The landlords retaliated by also attacking at night. They raided homes, killing any suspected society members and their families. More and more secret societies popped up in Ireland, joining the ranks of the White Boys and Ribbon Men. Sometime in the 1830s or 1840s, the name of the Molly Maguires surfaced to defend the working class.
Where the Molly Maguires' name originated is a mystery. It's possibly from an Irish widow who fought back against English landlords. This woman, named Molly Maguire, ran a group called the Anti-Landlord Agitators. The group would get into brawls with landlords, often yelling, "Take that from a son of Molly Maguire." The violence gained traction, and the society became known as the Molly Maguires. Looking to escape the Irish potato famine from 1845 to 1850, over 1 million Irish immigrants traveled to the United States. They did not find the United States very welcoming, however. Prejudice had followed them, and employers would hang signs saying, "Help wanted. Irish need not apply."
What had once been a house for a single family would be rented out room by room at a higher rent rate to the Irish. Boston was notoriously bad, with landlords renting a small boxed-off room for $1.50 per week that didn't have plumbing, ventilation, or windows. By 1850, New York had more Irish-born children than Dublin. These Irish immigrants who had survived the struggle of English landlords and a famine were no strangers to the class war that was now coming to a head in Pennsylvania.
Between 1850 to 1890, mining of anthracite coal created an uneven distribution of payout for impoverished miners versus the wealthy coal mine operators in Pennsylvania. Anthracite coal has a high value because of its high carbon content combined with the clear or lack of smoke while burning. Unlike mining for gold, which is a single-person operation, coal mining takes a team and someone to initially fund the mining.
People who backed the startup for the mine could make a ton of money quickly. The miners, however, made low or unsteady income and worked in dangerous conditions. With no labor laws or unions, the mines were dangerous and in poor condition for the workers. In 1869, 111 miners were killed after a fire broke out at the Avondale mine, blocking the only entrance and exit to the mine, causing the miners inside to suffocate. The horrific working conditions and safety issues were blamed for the Avondale mine disaster.
The real reason those men died at the Avondale mine was because the mine operators refused to spend a couple of dollars to create a second entrance or exit to the mine. As thousands of miners and families gathered outside to watch the bodies of their friends and families be removed, a man named John Siney climbed on top of a cart with a call to justice.
Men, if you must die with your boots on, die for your families, your homes, your country, but do not longer consent to die, like rats in a trap, for those who have no more interest in you than in the pick you dig with.
This call to action summarized how the miners were feeling, that they were nothing but worker bees that mattered not to the operators of the mine.
It makes more sense for me. Thank you, Paige.
Sure. The Working Men's Benevolent Association was a union that had been created the prior year as an organization to fight for worker rights. After the Avondale fire, workers flocked to join the union. Hundreds of miners died every year due to safety issues. The miners had families that depended on them, but unhealthy and unsafe conditions could lead to death or disability, with no one in the family to bring in an income. Children as young as 8 would also work in the mines to help earn income for their families.
The miners were frequently not paid with cash, but in company script to be used at the company store. This made it even more difficult to move away or better themselves, as they were literally penniless and one step away from being enslaved to the company. A study in 1848 found that one company paid their miners 83 cents per day in company script. The miners and their families were forced to use their wages in the company store, which was priced 10 to 50 cents higher per item. The quantity of items was also less. Soap was sold in 16 bars instead of a 20-bar pack, for example.
Anything that was in the store that was even 10 cents higher was an eighth of their daily wage. And that 50-cent markup is like 60% of their wage. That's massive.
That's so unfair.
To top it off, large railroad companies took over the mines, buying out the individual small businesses. These railroad companies, owned by large corporations, then began by purchasing coal mine land. In 1846, there were 20 railroad companies in the anthracite Pennsylvania region, but by 1873, there were only 6 companies remaining. If they existed at all, the working class needed someone like the Molly Maguires to fight on their behalf. The Pennsylvania Molly Maguires would have been made up almost entirely of Irish coal miners. Any Irishman or son of an Irishman belonged to the ancient order of Hibernians, also called the AOH.
Unfortunately, the AOH main office was based out of New York and didn't care about the rights of coal miners a state away, as they had bigger problems in front of them. It was different in the anthracite mining regions of Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Their local AOH branch was controlled by the working class miners. The coal miners' union wasn't able to help the miners. Politicians were paid off by the large coal companies, and the main branch of the AOH had turned their back on the working class miners. A quote from John L. Sexton summarized the coal owners' feelings at the time.
So eager were the mine owners to open their mines that the health and safety of their employees were never taken into consideration. It was the coal that they wanted, and the trifling incident of 1 or 2 or a half dozen miners in the pit, or more properly, crematories, must not stand in the way of progress and developments.
It was the perfect storm for the Molly Maguires to resurface across the ocean in Pennsylvania. It's hard to tell if the Molly Maguires were a large organization because the reports were skewed to imply that they were a large organization and must be stopped. According to the Columbia County Historical Society, there were 478 members of the Mollys by the 1870s. It's all alleged information as well. We don't know that the secret portion of the Pottsville AOH even created a society called the Molly Maguires.
The miners continued to riot, strike, and in 1864 alone, 11 mine bosses were killed during labor disputes. 3 years after the coal boom of the Civil War, pay cuts and mass unemployment were leading to starvation of entire families. In 1868, almost 20,000 miners went on strike to support the 8-hour workday. The workers would strike for 4 months before returning to work without gaining any change. In the 1870s, the coal operators combined their resources to wipe out the unions. The fighting between the miners and the operators had become so vicious that the operators created their own police force to stop the strikers, called the Pennsylvania Cossacks. Eventually, even the actual police and the Pennsylvania Cossacks couldn't stop the fighting and the striking, so the operators took drastic action.
In 1871 or 1872, Franklin B. Gowen of the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to act as spies to infiltrate the miners and destroy their unions. Franklin was a lawyer and former district attorney, and by 1873 he was also the president of the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. As the local district attorney, he was aware of the multiple times the courts had pardoned a miner for an attack on the railway or coal superintendents.
So Franklin paid the Pinkerton Agency $100,000 for their spy services. These men were recruited from the poor and those with criminal backgrounds to do whatever the agency needed to stop the miners and determine who was, in fact, a Molly Maguire. Of the dozens of spies, only 2 names remain as men who worked at the Pinkerton Agency: James McParland, sometimes listed as James McParland with a D, and Robert Linden. When James McParland was hired, he was told, "You are to remain in the field until every cutthroat has paid with his life for the lives so cruelly taken." Assuming the name James McKenna, red-headed James McParland infiltrated the miner operations. James was chosen as he was also an Irish immigrant, and the spy would need to be Irish to join the local AOH branch. James loved to sing and dance and appears to have infiltrated the miners fairly quickly. He was hired as a coal miner in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania in February 1874. By April 14th, James was accepted as a member of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. James would report weekly to Franklin Gowen and the Pinkerton Agency. James reported that the Mollys had approximately 4,000 members who were also members of the AOH. James referred to the AOH branch as the Molly Maguires, and there is no other proof that the Mollys existed other than James's story. As an immigrant, James might have been in Ireland to see the Irish Mollys in action. Yep. Later, James said that he convinced the miners to tell him about their secret Molly Maguire business within 10 days of knowing him. Turns out, James was lying about the confession, and it's not the last time he would be caught in a lie. James would also commit crimes and blame it on the miners. James would be called to the witness stand later, where he would blatantly lie about how the events occurred. The number of murders increased during the years that the Pinkerton Agency was operating in Pennsylvania. James stated that he had to have known before they were committed the details of various projected crimes, which helped him notify operators who may have been targeted or have the miners caught in their actions. So basically what this means is that James was able to tip off the mine operators if the Mollys or the AOH was planning an attack. So he was working as an inside man and had the details of what he says various projected crimes. So these crimes had not happened yet. And in several cases, the Mollys or, the AOH, the miners went after somebody and that person wasn't there anymore. But then it turned into an ambush because the operators knew where the miners were going to be. And so the miners ended up dying.
1875 was a year of revolution for the miners. In February, a mine shaft caught fire without a cause being found. Events happened several days in a row and sometimes multiple times a day in March. Several watchmen were beaten, and their possessions, including rope and a gun, were stolen. Employees of the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company Railway were mobbed and intimidated into quitting their jobs.
On March 25th, a Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company train with 100 cars ran off the track and caused $300 in damages. The following day, another engine ran off the track. Then on the 28th, a train warehouse was broken into, and 3 barrels of flour, 600 pounds of fish, and 1 barrel of butter were stolen. I gotta tell you, when I was doing the research for this, I hit the point where 600 pounds of fish were missing, and that really made me laugh. What in the world are you doing with 600 pounds of fish quickly and without a smell?
Yeah. I don't know, some sort of fish fry? Like, were they wanting to fry the fish and feed the families? I don't know.
But don't let the operators know that you have the fish? So you're just going to have to distribute it quietly among everybody?
Something smells fishy around here, I think.
Right? Like the flour and the butter, get it, guys, but 600 pounds of fish?
Mm-hmm. They would have to keep that, like, I don't know, cold for it to be good, right?
As destitute as they were, I can't imagine they dumped the fish and wasted it. So I'm sure that somebody divvied it up and made sure that no one went hungry.
Mm-hmm.
But part of me wonders if they just dumped it back into the river and was like, get rid of it kind of a thing. Because then nobody could get caught with it, right?
I mean, 600 pounds, though.
That's a lot of fish.
How many fish do you think that would be?
That was a good train warehouse to break into.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had the goods there. In June, 500 to 1,000 men physically stopped others from working in 7 different mines. By noon, the men had stormed Mahoney City as a riot of 1,200 people, demanding the release of a man who had been arrested that morning. The rioters paid the fine, and the man was released from jail. 2 police officers would be injured after shots were fired into the mob.
At the same time, the long strike of 1875 had begun in January. 3 weeks into the strike, the operators were not feeling the pressure, but the miners were starting to starve. Strike breakers were brought in by the mine operators, and law enforcement was called in to protect the strike breakers. The world was watching as these miners continued to fight for their rights, the rights of the union and the rights of workers across the country. 6 months into the strike, 1,000 men marched from mine to mine, yelling to strike breakers who continued to work.
Unfortunately, the miners were starving and hadn't worked in 6 months by June 1875. They would be defeated by the large corporation of operators. The men who led the strike were fired and blacklisted from working in any mine, even outside of the state. Supporters of the unions were given the worst working conditions and ridiculed by the mine superintendents. The wages of the miners were also cut in half. After the long strike of 1875, the miners' battle now became underground warfare. The operators were determined to keep apart any gathering of miners, even targeting the AOH. More than one member of the AOH was quietly murdered by the mine operators. 100 miners gathered, demanding change. But the mine boss and foreman began shooting into the crowd, wounding several and killing one man. The shooter was arrested but found not guilty because he
protected himself from a mob of assassins. On May 7, 1876, the New York Herald published an article titled "Dynamite Explosion, a Horrid Plot. The explosion on Bergen's Heights caused by strikers, New Jersey laborers following the methods of the Molly Maguires." Clearly, anyone opposing the horrible working conditions or striking became known as a Molly Maguire, including those in New Jersey and Ohio. In 1875 and 1876, the miners were portrayed in the newspapers as cold-blooded murderers. Allegations were made of the Mollys using kidnapping and arson in their fight, but no evidence has connected them to any kidnapping or arson attacks. However, 4 murders and an attempted murder in the summer of 1875 would become the end of the Molly Maguires.
Of those 5 events, on June 28, 1875, 4 Mollys shot Bully Bill Thomas and left him for dead in the stables. Bully Bill would survive the attack. A week after Bully Bill's attack, a police officer named Benjamin Yost was shot while he was on a ladder to extinguish a street lamp post. Benjamin died the next morning after telling fellow officers that he had been shot by 2 Irishmen. Benjamin had traded his shift for another officer, Bernard McCarran. Bernard had recently beaten a miner and was the actual target for this murder.
On September 3, 1875, John P. Jones, a mine superintendent who had blacklisted and fired striking miners, was shot and killed. At 42 years old, John was buried at the Oddfellows Cemetery in Lansford, Pennsylvania. The final Molly Maguire attack was of Thomas Sanger and William Urin. Thomas and William were walking to work when they were gunned down. A miner, Charles O'Donnell, was suspected of the crime and a mob stormed his home, murdering Charles, his son, and his daughter. No arrests would be made for 5 months, and then in February 1876, Thomas Munley and Charles McAllister were arrested for murder. Thomas Munley was charged with murder and sentenced to death. The jury was unconvinced of Charles McAllister's involvement, and his brother would be charged with murder instead. Charles would be back in jail for an attempted murder charge of a different man later, though.
So to summarize, we have 4 murders and an attempted murder that's going to be the downfall of the Mollys. So you have the attempted murder of Bully Bill Thomas, the murder of Benjamin Yost, the murder of John P. Jones, and then the final one is the murder of Thomas Sanger and William Urin. 3 miners would be arrested for the murder of John P. Jones. That would be Michael Doyle, Edward Kelly, and John Kerrigan. The last, John Kerrigan, was never tried, as he flipped on the other miners and actually helped to send Michael Doyle and Edward Kelly to their deaths. A hotel owner, Alexander Campbell, would also be charged with conspiracy to murder of John P. Jones. Alexander's only connection to the murder was that his hotel was used for the AOH meetings.
The court agreed to try all Michael Doyle, Edward Kelly, and John Kerrigan separately, beginning with the trial of Michael Doyle. 120 witnesses were brought to the court. One witness said that he had seen Edward Kelly hide in bushes after firing the shots at John Jones. The defense would point out that there were no bushes to even hide in. No Irish Americans were on the jury. Instead, it was primarily German immigrants that did not speak English. Still, the defense didn't even call witnesses because they felt there was no need. Michael was clearly not guilty. The jury, threatened with lynching, returned a guilty verdict for the first-degree murder. Edward Kelly would also be found guilty of murder.
For the murder of police officer Benjamin Yost, 5 men were arrested: James Carroll, Thomas Duffy, James Rorty, James Boyle, and Hugh McGeehan. According to the spy James McCarlin, the 5 men had had an AOH meeting to plan the murder. Thomas Duffy had put up $10 to pay Hugh McGeehan and James Boyle to do the actual shooting. James McParlin also stated on the stand that he had been present during the shooting. All 5 men would be found guilty and sentenced to death.
The leader of the AOH was John Kehoe, and he was known as the King of the Mollys and Black Jack Kehoe. In August 1876, John was arrested for the conspiracy to murder, but the man he had supposedly attacked wasn't injured. Another charge was then thrown at John. This time he would be found guilty of the murder of Frank Langdon from 14 years previously. John was charged with being present during a mob attack where Frank was stoned to death. Not striking him, but being present was enough to convict John of murder.
In 1868, Alexander Rhee, a mining superintendent, was murdered. Patrick Hester, Thomas Donahue, Mikkel Pryor, and John Duffy were arrested in that December of 1868. All 4 miners were either found not guilty or acquitted. Patrick Hester went on to be an influential AOH member, and 2 other influential members of the AOH, Peter McHugh and Patrick Tully, would all 3 be charged for the murder of Alexander Rhee 7 years later. A witness, Manus Cole, or under the alias Daniel Kelly, told the court that he saw Patrick Hester, Peter McHugh, and Patrick Tully shoot then beat Alexander to death. A lot of names here. Basically, Patrick Hester was present at the time of Alexander's death, but because Patrick Hester, Peter McHugh, and Patrick Tully were all influential AOA members, they were all found guilty of Alexander's murder. Peter and Patrick Tully were not even tried or involved in the original 1868 trial. They were just lumped into this as they could have been involved and sentenced to death.
People are just pointing fingers because they can. This was not fair at all. This was not a fair trial at all.
Nope. German immigrants that can't speak English and the operators with all the money are threatening people. It's a really sad situation.
One of the men to be hung on Black Thursday was Alexander Campbell. As the jailers came for him, he took mud from the jail floor and slammed his muddy hand on the cell wall, saying,
"That mark of mine will never be wiped out. It will remain forever to shame the county for hanging an innocent man." And this is where our secret society turns to a little bit of a ghost story or paranormal story. That mark remains today. Almost 150 years later, you can visit cell number 17 at the old Carbon County Jail in what is now Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, and you can still see Alexander Campbell's handprint. We'll post a photo of it on our socials.
You think at some point that would have been washed away?
They tried. They tried many, many times.
They tried to wash it?
Yes, it will not come off. Simply his hand covered in mud, slapped on the wall, will not come off because they hung an innocent man.
That's weird. Like, what are the cell walls made of? Is it cement or?
I think it's block.
Just cement block?
Like it's very old. Might be bricks.
Very old.
I saw the picture of it, but I guess I don't really remember what it was made of. It's like block or brick, maybe.
Okay. You'd think it would still wash off.
It went a little spooky vibes. Thomas Munley, James Carroll, James Rorty, Michael J. Doyle, Edward Kelly, Alexander Campbell, John Donahue, Thomas Fisher, John Kehoe, Patrick Hester, Patrick Tully, Peter McHugh, Peter McManus, James Boyle, Thomas Duffy, Hugh McGeehan, and Andrew Lanahan were all hung on Black Thursday. 2 more men were hung on January 14, 1879, Charles Sharp and James McDonald. Then 2 days later, the final execution was of Martin Bergen.
200 people gathered to watch the executions. Hugh McGeehan walked to the gallows with a small brass crucifix in his hand and pink and white roses in his shirt. James Boyle carried a red rose in his hand on the walk to the gallows. James and Hugh were hung together, and after making short speeches, James turned to Hugh and said,
"Goodbye, old fellow. We'll die like men."
Hugh nodded his head in approval. The Molly Maguires Society appears to have died on the gallows with these men. Thousands attended the funerals of the 19 or 20 men who were hanged. The working class stood with the men who died fighting against the corporations.
Instead of ending organizations like the mine operators had hoped, the mass executions of the Mollys had the opposite effect. The men who gave their lives were viewed as heroes to the working class. More unions and worker right organizations were formed. The strikes continued into the 1900s and today. James McParland continued working for the Pinkerton Agency, and by 1906, he was head of a Denver office location. He never changed tactics and attempted to pin the murder of an Idaho governor on 3 Western Federation of Miners leaders. These men were much better represented and would not be charged for the murder.
Just 12 years later, the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company went bankrupt in 1889, and Franklin Gowen would commit suicide in a hotel room. In 1979, at the request of John Kehoe's descendants, an investigation was opened. They determined that John was most likely innocent of the crimes that he had been charged with, and John would be granted a posthumous pardon from the governor.
I borrowed some amazing vintage books from the library on the Molly Maguires, ranging from publication in 1932 to 1956. I knew we were onto a unique topic when the books traveled over 100 miles through the library system to me and then had stickers showing checkouts dating back to like November 23rd, 1990, January 24th, 2000, and May 2nd, 2002. Like a total score. The first book was The Molly Maguires by Anthony Bimba. Another book I would recommend is Molly Maguire Riots by J. Walter Coleman. If you can get your hands on the books, they provide an in-depth look at the Pennsylvania Molly Maguire riots.
You should have slapped a Corrupt Podcast sticker on one of those books.
Those books are 80 years old. I wouldn't even put it in the book return. I walked them into the library and handed them to the circulation desk and was like, these are really vintage, starting to fall apart, losing some pages in the middle. Can we please put them gently in the book return? She took them from me. She took pity on me.
Oh my gosh.
She probably thought I was a nut, but she took pity on me. I'm like, don't just drop them in. It's like 1932.
She was probably like, yeah, whatever. Plop.
Probably.
In 1970, the Molly Maguires movie was released. The movie starred Sean Connery as Jack Kehoe and was filmed in northeastern Pennsylvania. So some things to mention about this movie. I waited forever until a word was first spoken. It was like a 5-minute mark of the movie.
Yep.
And I was like, there's no word. There's just no words.
It's funny you say that because my husband actually like walked away and came back and he's like, dear Lord, did you skip to the end of the movie? Like, why did you skip to the end? Because it was still silent. No words had been said. And they show the Mollys down in the mine and they're setting up explosives.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have to know that the Mollys are fighting the man and everybody's just covered in black paint. Like their faces have literally been painted black. It doesn't look like soot. It just looks like black paint.
That's what confused me too. It was so hard to distinguish like what character that I was looking at because the two main characters, if you watch it, they both have mustaches. And when they're covered, they have a hat on and they're covered with the black paint. It's like, who is this again? I thought it was also hard to follow. Like, I feel like it just like jumped from this to that and we were instantly supposed to know what was going on. And I'm like, you take 5 minutes before you even speak a word, but you can't like explain, like you put a little bit more commentary in there to kind of explain what's going on. Like there could be subtle hints here, but it just wasn't.
Apparently no hints were needed. I'm with you. It kind of bounced around. If you were unfamiliar with the Molly Maguires when you watched the movie, you're lost. Like you have to already know that they were a secret society in Pennsylvania.
Sean Connery, you know, I only knew him from 007 films like James Bond. Super, super handsome.
Ew.
Loved
really?
Seeing him in this. What? You don't think he's handsome?
He was covered in black paint the whole time, so maybe that's my problem.
When he wasn't in black paint, though. The structure of his face, very masculine.
He's very masculine. I'll give you that. Not a whole lot else going on there, but he is very masculine. The mustache, very nice mustache.
The mustache, yeah. And Richard Harris, I thought was like really, really gorgeous as well.
Also, he's Dumbledore.
I know, yeah.
I was Googling who this is. I had no idea. He's the Sorcerer's Stone and the Chamber of Secrets. He's that Dumbledore.
Okay, I was going to ask because I thought there was 2 different actors.
There's 2. He passes away, and then starting in The Prisoner of Azkaban, they go with a different actor.
Okay.
They don't really have a choice.
Okay. He played a real well James McParlin. I loved the romance aspect of it. You're like, what? That's just me, Paige, okay? I love the yearning.
But then she finally falls for him and he's a weasel.
He's a weasel? She didn't go with him. What are you talking about?
He's a weasel. She shouldn't go with him.
She should have totally went with him because
he has poor character.
Okay, I'm up for debate about this because in the middle of the film, if you do not remember, they had that little picnic and they were like, she's like, you need to go. You need to leave me. Like, I cannot do this, basically. Like, I can't be with you if you're, doing this and whatnot. And then she realizes that he's an actual cop or detective doing the greater good or what, I don't know. And then she just, like, doesn't go with him. It just it doesn't align.
It does. Her dad died after being in the mines. And then you're telling her just to give it up. It's fine. He's a weasel. He betrayed all of his fellow Irishmen and just moved to Denver.
Well, why was she having such a hard time then?
I don't know.
When he was like with the Mollys.
I don't know.
Like, she was like battling with herself. Like, why do I need to be like, she should have went head over heels for him.
I think it's because he was part of the Mollys. Like, she wanted him to maybe work in the mines, but not
just be regular.
Be up to the, like, quote, like Molly shenanigans.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then he jumped in with the, John Kehoe, which would have been the head of the Mollys, and she knew that. Mm-hmm. So there was this like back and forth where she's struggling with what she wants to do. And then at the end, she's like, oh, wait, I'm not going to be with this traitor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for our listeners, though, just, pause this, go watch the movie, get to the end, and then come back because we just totally spoilered you there.
Yeah, sorry. At the very end, I pay close attention to details, but at the very end where Richard Harris, that was playing James McParlin, was walking past the place of like where the Mollys were going to be hanged, they shot off, I don't know if you recognize this, they shot off like a tester where they hanged like a heavy bag. And there was a man standing like near the bag being hanged, and it was like below the man's head that was standing. So the distance like from the rope to the ground wasn't like far apart. They'd be more likely to like break their legs instead of their neck. Like, just the inconsistency there like bothered me. Like, I know it was 1970, but
they were not going to construct the full gallows. It was just too short.
Yeah, they should. I was waiting for that. I'm like, are we really going to see Sean Connery be hanged? Like, I was interested in like how they would do, like, show that. But I was let down. Not that I wanted to see him be hanged, but I was let down that it didn't happen. But yeah, what was your take on this show, this movie?
It stayed very true to the Molly story, but it was a strange movie. At one point, the women were like grouped together, crying or moaning over the older guy's death. And between James and his love interest, the girl whose name we don't know, there was like this really weird riddle scene that I had to rewind to make sure that I heard it right because I was really skeeved out. Just like all of a sudden, she just like blurts out breast milk. And I was like, what? Like, what are we talking about?
He asked her a question, and it was like something in white.
It was a freaking weird riddle.
Yeah.
And the answer was breast milk. And then they just like cut the scene.
It's like a really close-up shot, too, of her just saying breast milk.
Yes. And I think that really summarizes the movie as it's just such a strange put together of scenes. Like, they wanted a love interest, but yet it's supposed to be about the secret society, and it's about the crap that the miners are going through, and they're fighting the man. They're raging against that machine. And then you've got this like weird riddle, breast milk. Like, it's just a hodgepodge.
I think I would have connected better with the Mollys if like Sean Connery had, I don't want to say more of a part, but like more screen time. And it would have shown like him and his family more of just like how it affected them and how like they were really the working class, and like he's doing this for a purpose and he's doing this for a reason. Like, that would have affected me in a more positive way than them just focusing on James.
The fight.
Yeah.
Yep. It almost felt like a sequel.
Yeah.
Like, we've missed the first movie and now this is the sequel.
Exactly. To touch on the women grouped together, crying and moaning, this was a traditional Irish wake set around the 1730s called keening. Keening was a vocal lament performed by women, often professional mourners, known as bean shanoit. Shanoit? I don't know how to pronounce this. It was spontaneous and poetic song of mourning, praising the deceased the deceased's virtues and lamenting their death. So there you go. It's a traditional ritual.
Okay, that makes it way less creepy than it was. Knowing that that's actually something that's part of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for looking that up, because in the movie I was like, this is very strange.
Well, I had thought that as well. I'm like, there has to be a reason why there's just women in this room, like crying and moaning around this man laying dead on the table, while there's like games and drinking happening in the other room by the men.
On the 125th anniversary of Black Thursday in 2002, a park named Molly Maguire Historical Park would open in Mahoning City. Several plaques were hung describing the tragic loss of life and listing the 46 men and women who died from gun violence and hanging during that time. A copper monument depicts a miner standing at the gallows with a hood over his head.
There is a Molly Maguire auto trail you can drive from Pottsville to Philadelphia. The route takes you along the 24 stops related to the Molly Maguires. There are also cassettes that you can pick up for this 3 to 8 hour trip. We'll list the park and auto trail in the episode notes for anyone looking for an adventure through Pennsylvania.
And also that still has a cassette player in their car.
Yeah, mad respect to you guys.
I know. We have the portable cassette player, so I feel like we could still make this work.
Yeah. From the book titled Molly Maguires by Anthony Bimba, he said,
"These miners were militants. They spoke, they protested, they went on strike and fought against tyranny of coal companies. They called on other workers from mines to wage a common struggle. They were criminals in the eyes of the rulers because they made organized, determined effort to improve their desperately bad conditions." We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!